The thunder cracked like a whip across the Wyoming sky as Lillian Westbrook stared through rain-streaked glass, wondering if the storm would claim another soul tonight the way typhoid had claimed her husband 6 months earlier. It was 1885, and the promise of spring had done little to warm the hollow spaces of the farmhouse she now maintained alone. Lillian wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her 27 years feeling like 50 as she watched water pool in the yard. The small ranch that had once bustled with Thomas's energetic presence now stood silent, except for the occasional lowing of cattle in the barn. She touched the cold glass, her wedding ring catching what little light remained in the darkening evening. "Just a little longer," she whispered to herself. "If the creek rises any more, I'll have to move the remaining stock." The thought of wading through mud to the barn made her shoulders sag. Thomas would have known exactly what to do, would have been out there already securing everything while teasing her about fretting. But Thomas was gone, and the responsibility of their 20 acres fell squarely on her shoulders. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and Lillian froze. There, struggling against the wind, was a figure on horseback, bent low against the onslaught of rain. She squinted, certain her lonely mind was playing tricks, but when another burst of lightning split the sky, she saw the rider clearly making for her property. Instinctively, Lillian reached for the rifle Thomas had insisted she learn to shoot. Visitors during storms rarely brought good news, and a widow alone was vulnerable in ways married women couldn't fathom. She positioned herself just to the side of the window, rifle held steadily as the rider approached. The man dismounted awkwardly, seeming to favor one leg, and led his horse toward her barn without presumption. Lillian watched as he secured the animal, noting how he checked the stalls of her own livestock with a careful attention that spoke of experience. Only then did he make his way to her door, hat in hand, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the quiet house. Lillian kept the rifle ready but called out, "State your business, stranger." "Madam," a deep voice replied, "name's Isaac Harrington. My horse came up lame about 2 miles back, and I've been walking him through this mess. I don't mean to impose, but I'd be mighty grateful for shelter until this storm passes." Something in his tone, respectful yet strained, made Lillian step closer to the door. "Are you injured, Mr. Harrington?" A hesitation. "Nothing serious, madam. Took a fall when my horse stumbled, just a little banged up." Lillian took a deep breath. Thomas would have already welcomed the man in, offering coffee and a place by the fire. Her parents would have cautioned otherwise. A single woman entertaining a strange man invited gossip at best, danger at worst. But the rain was coming down in sheets now, and she couldn't send an injured man back into the storm. "I'm armed, Mr. Harrington," she called, moving to unbolt the door. "And I know how to use this rifle." "Wouldn't expect otherwise, madam." She pulled the door open, keeping the rifle visible but not directly aimed. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered under a dripping duster coat. His face, partially illuminated by her lamp, showed a strong jaw darkened with several days' growth of beard. But it was his eyes, tired but clear blue, that caught her attention. They held no malice, only exhaustion and something like resignation. "Come in then," she said, stepping back. "Leave your boots by the door." Isaac Harrington nodded gratefully, removing his sodden hat and duster with careful movements that confirmed her suspicion of injury. As he bent to pull off mud-caked boots, he winced, one hand automatically moving to his side. "You're more than a little banged up," Lillian observed, setting the rifle aside but keeping it within reach. "Let me see." "It's nothing that, Mr. Harrington," she interrupted firmly. "I buried my husband 6 months ago. I know the difference between nothing and something that needs tending." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps. He straightened as much as his injury allowed. "Yes, madam, Mrs. Westbrook, Lillian Westbrook. Mrs. Westbrook, I appreciate your kindness. Truth is, I think I might have cracked a rib when I fell." Lillian nodded and gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit. I'll fetch some bandages and something for the pain." While she gathered supplies, Lillian assessed her visitor more carefully. His clothes, though trail-worn, were of good quality. The gun belt at his waist held a well-maintained Colt, and the silver watch chain visible at his vest suggested a man of some means. Not a drifter, then, but perhaps a cattleman or businessman. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mr. Harrington," she commented, returning with her medical supplies. "What brings you out in weather like this?" Isaac accepted the cup of whiskey she offered, taking a small sip before answering. "I'm heading to Laramie on business. Thought I could make it before the storm hit, but misjudged the weather." "And the nature of your business?" Lillian asked, setting out bandages. A slight smile curved his mouth. "Cautious woman, smart." He took another sip. "I'm a livestock buyer, purchasing cattle for several ranches near Cheyenne." "I'll need you to remove your vest and shirt to wrap those ribs," she said, gesturing to his torso. Isaac hesitated. "Mrs. Westbrook, I don't want to compromise your reputation." Lillian almost laughed. "Mr. Harrington, I live 3 miles from my nearest neighbor. No one will know you're here, and frankly, my reputation means considerably less to me than it once did. Now, shirt off, please." With careful movements, Isaac unbuttoned his vest and shirt. Lillian maintained a clinical detachment as she helped him remove them, revealing a chest marked with old scars and, as expected, significant bruising along his left side. What she hadn't expected was the unmistakable puckered circle of a healing bullet wound just below his collarbone. Her eyes flicked up to his, questioning. "Rustlers, 2 months back," he explained quietly. "They weren't expecting the cattle they were stealing to be guarded." Lillian nodded, focusing on binding his ribs. "Hold your breath," she instructed, wrapping the bandages tightly around his torso. His skin was warm despite his soaked clothes, and she noticed the controlled way he breathed through the pain, never flinching even when she knew her ministrations must hurt. "You've done this before," he observed. "My husband was thrown from a horse more times than I care to count," she replied, securing the bandage. "And before that, my father was a doctor in Missouri." "You have skilled hands," Isaac said, then flushed slightly. I understand what you mean, Mr. Harrington," Lillian replied, feeling her own cheeks warm unexpectedly. It had been a long time since she'd felt that particular flutter of awareness. "You should rest. I'll make up a pallet by the fire." "I'd be happy to sleep in your barn," he offered. "No need to inconvenience yourself." "And have you undo all my careful bandaging by sleeping on hay?" "I think not." She stood, gathering her supplies. "Besides, the barn might flood if the creek rises further." Isaac nodded, carefully pulling his shirt back on but leaving it unbuttoned. "Thank you, Mrs. Westbrook. Not everyone would take in a stranger these days." "No," she agreed, "but I'd like to think someone would do the same for me if I were in need." Later, after arranging blankets near the hearth and providing Isaac with a bowl of stew from her supper pot, Lillian sat across from him, watching the firelight play across his features. There was something almost familiar about him, a quality she couldn't quite place. "How long have you been on the trail, Mr. Harrington?" she asked. "Nearly 3 weeks," he replied, setting aside his empty bowl. "And please call me Isaac. After patching me up, I think we can dispense with formalities." Lillian smiled slightly. "Very well, Isaac, and you may call me Lillian." "Lillian," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "It suits you." "And how would you know what suits me after less than 2 hours' acquaintance?" His eyes, warmer now in the firelight, held hers. "A lily is both strong and beautiful, able to grow in difficult conditions while maintaining its grace. Seems fitting." The compliment, unexpected and unadorned, caught her off guard. Lillian looked away, suddenly intensely aware of how long it had been since she'd had a conversation with anyone besides the shopkeeper in town or the occasional passing neighbor. "Tell me about your cattle business," she said, changing the subject. Isaac respected her redirection. "I work primarily for the Buchanan outfit in Cheyenne. They're expanding, buying up smaller herds and land when they can." He paused. "Which brings me to an awkward question. Is this ranch yours now?" "Yes," Lillian answered, her tone cooling slightly. My husband and I built it together. I'm not asking as a buyer, Isaac clarified quickly. Only, a widow alone on a working ranch, it can't be easy. It isn't, she admitted. But this land is all I have left of the life we planned. I'm not ready to give that up. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Something in his voice suggested personal experience, but Lillian didn't press. Instead, they talked of lighter things: the unusual spring weather, Isaac's travels across the territory, Lillian's small but stubborn herd of cattle. His knowledge of livestock was impressive, and several times he offered practical suggestions for improvements to her operation that showed genuine expertise rather than condescension. When the mantel clock struck 10, Lillian rose. I should retire. The storm seems to be passing, but you're welcome to stay until morning. She hesitated. Your horse will need rest anyway. Thank you, Isaac replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. I'll head out at first light. Lillian nodded, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. Good night, then. Good night, Lillian. And thank you again for your kindness. In her bedroom, Lillian changed into her nightgown and brushed her hair, conscious of the stranger just beyond her door in a way that made her both nervous and oddly comforted. The house had been so empty for so long that even the sound of another person breathing, moving quietly by the fire, eased some of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She slept more soundly than she had in months. Morning brought pale sunshine and the realization that the creek had indeed risen overnight, flooding parts of the lower pasture. Lillian dressed quickly, concerned for her livestock, only to discover Isaac already outside, moving her 3 cows and single horse to higher ground. She watched from the porch as he worked efficiently despite his injury, speaking softly to the animals as he guided them. There was an ease to his movements now that the initial pain had subsided, a natural grace that reminded her of Thomas in his handling of the cattle. When he returned, he looked surprised to see her waiting. Hope you don't mind, he said, removing his hat. Saw the water rising and thought I should move them. Thank you, Lillian replied, genuinely touched. Would you like breakfast before you leave? Something flickered in his eyes' reluctance, perhaps before he nodded. That would be much appreciated. Over coffee and biscuits, Isaac seemed more reserved than the previous evening, answering her questions politely but briefly. When they'd finished eating, he rose and gathered his things, carefully putting on his duster despite the clear skies. Your hospitality has been extraordinary, Lillian, he said formally. I'm in your debt. There's no debt between neighbors, she replied, walking him to the door. Even temporary ones. Outside, Isaac checked his horse, which seemed to have recovered from its lameness. As he adjusted the saddle, he turned to her with an oddly hesitant expression. My business in Laramie should take about a week, he said carefully. Would it be an imposition if I stopped here on my return journey? I could help with some repairs I noticed needed doing. Your corral has a weak section, and that barn roof won't last another heavy rain. Lillian studied him, searching for hidden motives but finding only sincerity in his steady gaze. I can't pay you for such work. I wouldn't expect payment, Isaac replied. Consider it thanks for your care. She should refuse, Lillian knew. A single woman accepting help from a man she barely knew invited speculation and gossip. But the truth was, the repairs were beyond her ability to complete alone, and hiring help would strain her limited funds. Very well, she said finally. I'll expect you in about a week. Isaac's smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and brightening his eyes. Until then, Mrs. Westbrook. She watched him ride away, his straight back and steady seat marking him as an experienced horseman. Only when he disappeared over the rise did Lillian wonder why her heart felt lighter than it had in months. True to his word, Isaac returned exactly 8 days later. Lillian tried to pretend she hadn't been watching for him each afternoon, standing by the window where she'd first spotted him in the storm. When she saw him approaching, leading a packhorse laden with supplies in addition to his own mount, Something warm unfurled in her chest. He'd brought lumber, roofing materials, and tools far more than necessary for the small repairs he'd mentioned. Lillian met him in the yard, eyebrows raised in question. "You said you couldn't pay me," Isaac explained, dismounting with much more ease than during their first meeting. "Never said I couldn't bring my own supplies." "This is too much," Lillian protested. Even as her eyes cataloged all the items her ranch desperately needed, Isaac shook his head. "I've been saving a man who owes me a favor. He was happy to clear his debt with these materials." His expression grew more serious. "Lillian, please, let me help." She wanted to argue to maintain the fierce independence that had kept her going these past months. But the honest concern in Isaac's eyes broke through her resistance. "3 days," she conceded. "You can stay and work for 3 days. After that, we're even." Isaac grinned, the expression boyish and charming on his weathered face. "Deal." Those 3 days stretched into 5 as Isaac tackled not only the corral and barn roof, but also repaired her chicken coop, fixed the sagging front porch steps, and reinforced the creek crossing that connected her property to the main road. He worked from sunup to sundown, stopping only for the meals Lillian prepared. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Mornings began with coffee shared on the porch as they planned the day's work. Lillian would attend to her own chores, feeding livestock, tending her small garden, preserving the early spring vegetables while Isaac worked on the repairs. They would meet for lunch, discussing progress and adjusting plans, then return to their separate tasks until supper. Evenings were spent by the fire, where their conversations gradually deepened. Isaac spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, his years working cattle drives before settling into his current position. Lillian shared memories of her life in Missouri, meeting Thomas at a church social, their dreams of building a life in Wyoming. "He sounds like a good man," Isaac said quietly on the 4th night, after Lillian had recounted a story about Thomas teaching local children to fish. "He was," she agreed, her grief softened now by fond remembrance rather than sharp pain. "He would have liked you." Isaac looked startled. "Why do you say that?" Lillian considered. "Thomas valued honesty and hard work above all else. And he believed in helping others without expectation of reward." She met Isaac's gaze steadily. "Those seem to be qualities you share." A flush crept up Isaac's neck and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just doing what any decent person would." "No," Lillian disagreed gently, "you're doing far more." The silence between them grew weighted with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Isaac cleared his throat. "I should leave tomorrow," he said, staring into the fire. "The major repairs are finished." Disappointment settled in Lillian's stomach, though she'd known this arrangement was temporary. "Of course, you've already stayed longer than we agreed." "I could come back," Isaac offered, still not looking at her. "Next time I'm passing through, check on things." "That would be." Lillian searched for the right word, one that wouldn't reveal too much of her growing attachment. "Kind." Isaac nodded, seemingly as lost for words as she was. The evening ended with awkward goodnights, both of them retreating earlier than had become their habit. In her bedroom, Lillian sat before her small mirror, brushing her hair with unusual attention. At 27, she was no longer the fresh-faced girl Thomas had married, but neither was she old. The woman who gazed back at her from the glass had clear eyes and a determined mouth, features weathered by sun and grief, but not defeated by either. For the first time since Thomas's death, she wondered what it might be like to build a new life, not replacing what was lost, but creating something different. The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. Morning brought unexpected rain, delaying Isaac's departure. They worked together in the barn, organizing tools and discussing which maintenance tasks should be prioritized in the coming months. The close quarters and shared labor created a companionable intimacy that felt both natural and charged with unacknowledged tension. "You know," Isaac said casually as they sorted nails, I pass this way regularly on my buying trips. Lillian nodded, keeping her eyes on her task. So you've mentioned. Every 6 weeks or so, usually. He paused. Would be easy to stop here, help maintain what we've fixed. Lillian finally looked up, studying his carefully neutral expression. And is that what you want, Isaac? To be my occasional handyman? Something flashed in his eyes, frustration perhaps, or resolve. He set down the box he was holding and stepped closer, not crowding her but definitely entering her space in a way he hadn't before. What I want, he said slowly, is a reason to come back that has nothing to do with repairs. Lillian's heart quickened. And what reason would that be? You, Isaac said simply. I want to see you, Lillian, talk with you, learn more about you. He took a deep breath. I haven't felt this way about anyone since before the war, and it terrifies me because you're still grieving and I have no right to. Isaac, Lillian interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. I will always love Thomas. He was my husband, my partner, my first love. She reached out, tentatively touching Isaac's arm. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for something else, someone else. Hope transformed his face. Are you saying, I'm saying I would like you to call on me properly, no more excuses about repairs or checking on things. Lillian straightened her shoulders. If you're interested in courting a widow with a struggling ranch and strong opinions, then state your intentions clearly. Isaac's smile started slowly, then widened into a grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Mrs. Westbrook, I would very much like to court you if you're amenable. I'm amenable, Lillian replied, unable to suppress her own smile. Though I warn you, my nearest neighbor will have the news spread to 3 counties within a week. Let them talk, Isaac said, his expression growing serious. All that matters is what's between us. The rain stopped late that afternoon, but Isaac didn't leave. Instead, they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the wet landscape in golds and pinks. Their hands found each other without either seeming to decide, fingers intertwining with a rightness that required no words. Over the following months, Isaac's visits became a cherished rhythm in Lillian's life. True to his word, he returned every 6 weeks, staying 3 or 4 days each time. Between visits, letters arrived regularly. Isaac's neat handwriting detailing his travels, business dealings, and increasingly, his feelings for her. Their courtship progressed with a measured patience that respected Lillian's grief while acknowledging their growing connection. Isaac never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content with conversations by firelight and walks around her property, their hands linked and plans tentatively forming. In August, Isaac arrived with news. He'd been offered a permanent position managing the Buchanan Ranch's Wyoming holdings, with a house on the property just 12 miles from Lillian's farm. I haven't accepted yet, he told her as they walked along the creek, now returned to its normal banks after the spring flooding. Wanted to discuss it with you first. It sounds like a good opportunity, Lillian said carefully, trying to gauge his thoughts. More stability than your current position. Isaac nodded, unusually serious. It is, but before I decide, there's something more important we need to talk about. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Lillian, these past months have been the happiest of my life, her heart stuttered. Mine too. I know it's still relatively soon, he continued, and I'll understand if you need more time, but I'm certain of my feelings. Isaac took both her hands in his. I love you, Lillian Westbrook. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the life you've built here and the woman you are. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as emotions welled up: joy, surprise, a bittersweet acknowledgement of how far she'd come since those dark days after Thomas's death. If you'll have me, Isaac said softly, I'd like to share that life, join our paths together. Isaac, Lillian whispered, squeezing his hands. Are you asking what I think you're asking? He smiled, a touch nervously. I'm making a mess of it, but yes, Lillian Westbrook, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes. The simple word hung between them for a moment before Isaac pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent. Lillian returned it with a certainty that surprised even her, recognizing that this new love didn't diminish what she'd shared with Thomas, but existed alongside it, different but equally precious. They married in October, a small ceremony in the town church with only a handful of neighbors and Isaac's colleagues as witnesses. Isaac moved onto Lillian's farm rather than taking the house offered by his employer, recognizing how important the land was to her. Together, they expanded the operation, combining Isaac's livestock knowledge with Lillian's stubborn resourcefulness. The house that had once echoed with loneliness gradually filled with new memories, new laughter. When their daughter was born the following September, a strong, lunged girl they named Hannah after Isaac's mother, the transformation was complete. This was no longer just the home Lillian had preserved in memory of Thomas, but a living, growing testament to second chances and unexpected joy. Years later, Lillian often thought about that stormy night when she'd stood at the window, watching the rain and wondering what would become of her. How close she'd come to turning Isaac away, to choosing isolation over risk. How fortunate that, despite her grief and fear, she'd found the courage to open her door to a stranger in need. On summer evenings, she and Isaac would sit on the porch, watching their children play in the yard while the setting sun gilded the land they'd nurtured together. In those moments, with his hand warm in hers and the future stretching out before them, Lillian knew that the widow who had waited silent at the window had found not just companionship but a whole new beginning when that cowboy knocked and never left again.